Hi all, apologies for the delay in bringing you the next instalment, but I did say on the last one that I would just try and share a little illustration that helps me at least just grasp the extent of our adoption as sons or as children into God's family. Now I'm going to use a little illustration, and I just want to say that I'm not saying by this illustration that this is how you would, could or should integrate an adopted child into your family. I'm just using it for illustrative purposes. So I want you to imagine a scenario where perhaps there's a couple. They already have two children, natural children, their own children, and they've decided to adopt another teenage child. So they go through the due process, and eventually it's time for this child to come and live with them permanently. So they give the child a couple of weeks just to get used to the house, to the household and the routine. But then perhaps they feel it's time just to sit the adopted child down and communicate a couple of things to them so that they can get the record straight, if you like, on a couple of issues going forward. So they invite their three children, the two natural ones and the adopted child, into the living room. They sit them down on the sofa and face the adopted child and say there's just a couple of things they want to say to that child. So the parents begin by saying that their natural children have a specific way in which they address them. They call them mum and dad. It's that intimate name that they've had because of their natural children and because they've grown up with them. So they say to the adopted child, "We're happy for you to call us by your first names, but the names mum and dad are only to be used by our natural children." So the adopted child responds and says, "Well, actually I fully understand that, I fully appreciate that. I'm just really grateful that you've adopted me into your family, that you've taken me into your home, that you've got this commitment to look after me and take care of me, and I'm really grateful for that." So then the adopted parents say, "Well, there's something else we want to tell you as well." And so they say, "Well, when we write our will, it will just include our two natural children. You won't be in it, I'm afraid." So then perhaps the adopted child says, "Well, actually I fully understand that, I appreciate that. I just want to say thank you for taking me into your home and your family and making this commitment to take care of me and look after me." And with perhaps a little bit of relief, the parents, having communicated those two things to the adopted child, and the adopted child seems to have taken them on board fairly well, bring that conversation to a close. But that's not the way that God has adopted us into his family. Imagine if we could be sitting in a heavenly lounge, and God invites us in, and as we come into the room and he invites us to sit on a sofa, we see at the other end of the sofa is his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. And the Father says to us, "This is my only begotten Son. He has been with me from everlasting, and he has a particular intimate way in which he addresses me. He calls me Abba." And then God the Father turns to us and he says, "I want you to know you can call me Abba as well." And then he says to us, "This my begotten Son, Jesus Christ, he is my heir. Everything I own, I leave to him." And he then turns to us and he says, "I have made you joint heirs with him." And so we see the extent to which God has adopted us into his family. But you know, sometimes we're a little bit like the adopted child in my illustration. We're invited in, we sit on that sofa, so to speak, and God is communicating these privileges and rights which are ours, and we're there reluctant. In our hearts, as it were, we won't enter into the full joy of what God has done for us. We say in our hearts, well, we're not worthy. Those things are just for Christ. He's the only begotten. He is the one who's pleased the Father from everlasting. How can we take on those rights and privileges? And we sit there and we say, God, I'm just grateful that you've saved me. I'm just grateful that you've adopted me into your family. But we don't enter into perhaps the full joy of those privileges that are ours. And you know, God says to us, this is how much I love you. This has been my goal all along. The plan of God the Father, before he even created this world, was always to extend his family, expand his family, that we might enjoy the very same relationship that Christ the only begotten enjoys with his Father. That's been his goal all along. Christ came and died for us in order to achieve that goal. He has not got any animosity against us, that we're in some way pushing into his rights and privileges. He gave his life. It shows us how much he wants us to know the Father and enter into the joy of knowing the Father with all its rights and privileges that he has had from everlasting with his very own heavenly Father. So, as God's people, let's not just be sitting on that heavenly sofa, grateful for what God has done, but not entering into the joy of this close, intimate relationship that he desires to have with us. And perhaps in the next instalment, we'll think a little bit about how has all this come about? How have we ended up in this place of being adopted as God's children and being part of his family? God bless.